Welcome to Dark Seduction Stories, where dangerous love, powerful obsessions, and romance that changes everything. Drop your location in the comments, and let's dive into tonight's tale. The accident happened on a Tuesday, which Simone would later think was fitting. Tuesdays had always felt like the most unremarkable day of the week, the day when nothing significant ever occurred. And yet, in the span of 3 seconds, a Tuesday had stolen the only thing that mattered in her world. She didn't remember the explosion itself. Her colleagues told her later that there had been a flash, a chemical reaction gone wrong, something about incompatible compounds and a moment of inattention. Simone remembered reaching for a beaker. She remembered the peculiar green color of the solution inside, like spring leaves after rain. Then nothing. When she woke in the hospital, her face bandaged, her head pounding. The first thing she'd asked for was water. The nurse had brought it, and Simone had lifted the cup to her lips, expecting the flat mineral taste of hospital tap water. Nothing. At first, she thought it was the medications. Then she thought it was temporary swelling, nerve damage that would heal. The doctors had been optimistic, then cautiously optimistic, then carefully neutral. 6 months later, standing in her grandmother's perfume laboratory in Grasse with tears streaming down her face, Simone had finally accepted the truth. Her sense of smell was gone, completely, utterly, permanently gone. For anyone else, it would have been an inconvenience. For Simone Blanc, 5th-generation perfumer and the heir apparent to Maison Blanc, one of France's most prestigious fragrance houses, it was a death sentence. She'd tried to continue working. For 3 months, she'd shown up to the laboratory every morning, going through the motions, pretending she could still contribute. But perfumery without scent was like music without sound, painting without color. She could measure and mix, could follow formulas with technical precision. But the soul of the work, the artistry, the magic, was gone. Her colleagues had been kind, painfully kind, which somehow made it worse. Her grandmother had said nothing at all, which was worse still. Simone had submitted her resignation on a grey morning in March. Grand-mère had accepted it with a single nod, her weathered hands folded on her desk, her expression unreadable. "Take time," she'd said. "Rest. Heal. We will speak of the future when you are ready." But Simone knew there was no future. Not in perfume. Not in the only world she'd ever known or wanted. She'd spent the next 6 months in a small apartment in Paris, as far from Grasse as she could manage while still remaining in France. She'd tried to imagine other careers, other lives. She could teach, perhaps, chemistry to bored university students who would never understand the poetry of molecular structures. She could consult. She could write. She could do 1,000 things that weren't what she was meant to do. The letter arrived in September, forwarded from Maison Blanc. Heavy cream paper, no return address, her name written in deep blue ink with a fountain pen. Inside, a single paragraph in the same elegant hand. "Mademoiselle Blanc, I have been following your case with great interest. I believe I can help you. If you are willing to trust an unconventional approach, please meet me at the address below. I do not make this offer lightly, nor do I make it often, but I have seen your work, and I believe you deserve a chance to return to it. Yours in craft, Olivier Deveraux." The address was in Grasse. Of course it was. Simone had crumpled the letter, thrown it away, retrieved it an hour later, smoothed it flat, read it 17 more times. Olivier Deveraux. She knew the name, though she'd never met the man. He was something of a legend in fragrance circles. A master perfumer who'd trained in Grasse decades ago, before disappearing into private work. Rumor said he created bespoke scents for royalty, for celebrities who paid obscene amounts for his discretion. Rumor also said he was difficult, demanding, possibly mad. Simone had stared at the letter until the words blurred. She'd told herself it was impossible, that whatever he was offering would be snake oil, false hope, cruelty dressed up as kindness. She'd told herself she wouldn't go. She'd been back in Grasse within 48 hours. The address led her to a narrow house, tucked into one of the old town's winding streets, the kind of place tourists walked past without noticing. The door was painted deep green, the color of cypress shadows. Simone had stood outside for 5 minutes, her hand raised to knock, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was foolish. This was desperate. This was the act of someone who had nothing left to lose. She knocked. The man who opened the door was not what she'd expected. Olivier Deveraux was tall, lean, somewhere in his late 30s, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes the color of good whiskey. He wore linen trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and when he smiled, Simone felt something shift in her chest, some awareness that had nothing to do with perfume and everything to do with the way he looked at her, like she was already interesting, already worth his time. "Mademoiselle Blanc," he said, and his voice was warm, textured, like aged wood. "Thank you for coming. Please." He stepped aside, and Simone walked into what could only be described as organized chaos. The ground floor was a single large room, part laboratory, part studio, part something else she couldn't quite name. Tables covered with bottles and beakers, shelves lined with ingredients she recognized and many she didn't. The light was strange, filtered through amber-tinted windows, giving everything a golden glow. And the smell, oh, the absence of smell. The vacuum where her knowledge told her there should be an overwhelming assault of scent, hundreds of fragrances mingling in the air. She must have made a sound, some small noise of loss, because Olivier's hand touched her elbow gently. "I know," he said, quietly. "Come, sit. Let me explain what I'm offering before you decide I'm insane." He led her to a seating area in the corner, 2 worn leather chairs and a low table. On the table sat a tea service, already prepared, steam rising from the pot. Olivier poured without asking, handed her a cup. Simone took it automatically, raised it to her lips, tasted chamomile and honey and nothing else, just the basic sensation of warm liquid. No nuance, no depth. "I'm not going to insult you by pretending I can restore your olfactory nerves," Olivier said, settling into the opposite chair. "The damage you sustained is permanent." But he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the intensity in his gaze made Simone's breath catch. "Our experience of scent isn't purely physical. It's deeply connected to memory, emotion, context. Synesthesia, the crossing of sensory experiences, can be trained, cultivated. I believe I can teach you to perceive fragrance through other senses, to taste it, to feel it, to hear it even." Simone set down her cup carefully. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Olivier smiled. "You've worked with fragrance your entire life. You know that scent is vibration, molecular shapes triggering receptors. You know that our perception of it is subjective, that memory and association shape what we smell as much as chemistry does. What I'm proposing is simply redirecting those associations, teaching your brain to experience fragrance through alternative pathways. That sounds like mysticism, not science." "It's both." He rose, moved to one of the tables, returned with a small bottle. "May I?" Simone nodded, not trusting her voice. Olivier uncapped the bottle, tilted it, let a single drop fall onto his fingertip. Then he reached out, touched that fingertip to the inside of Simone's wrist, where her pulse beat against her skin. "Close your eyes," he said. She did, and immediately felt foolish. This was theater. This was... His other hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm through the thin fabric of her blouse. "Don't think," he murmured. "Just feel. The texture, the temperature, the way it changes as it warms against your skin." Simone focused on the spot where his finger had touched her wrist. The liquid there felt cool, slightly oily. As it warmed, the sensation changed, became almost effervescent, like tiny bubbles bursting. It tingled, and underneath the tingle, something else, something she couldn't quite name, but that made her think of darkness, of earth, of things growing in shadows. "What do you feel?" Olivier's voice was very close now, almost a whisper. It tingles, and it's cool, but getting warmer, and..." She struggled for words. "Heavy. It feels heavy, somehow. Dark. Good." She could hear the smile in his voice. "That's patchouli. Your skin is responding to its molecular weight, its density. Your nerves are giving you information about its structure. Now, His fingers moved from her shoulder to her jaw, tilting her face slightly upward. "Keep your eyes closed. I'm going to put something on the table. Listen." She heard a soft clink, glass on wood. Then nothing for a long moment. Then a sound so faint she almost missed it. A high, clear note, like the edge of a bell's chime. "The bottle is singing," Olivier said. "The liquid inside has a specific viscosity, a specific surface tension. When I set it down, it created a vibration. Can you hear it?" Simone strained, and yes, there it was, the faintest harmonic, already fading. "I hear it. That's bergamot. Top note, light, effervescent. Its molecular structure creates a different resonance than patchouli, different weight, different movement." He lifted his hand from her face, and Simone opened her eyes. Olivier was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between satisfaction and hunger. "This is what I can teach you," he said. "Not to smell again. That's gone. But to experience fragrance in new ways. To rebuild your relationship with scent through every other sense you possess. It will take time, months, perhaps longer. It will require you to trust me, to let me guide you into experiences that may feel strange, even uncomfortable. But if you're willing..." He paused, held her gaze. "I believe I can give you back your craft. Not as it was, but as something new, something perhaps even more profound." Simone's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. What do you want in return?" Olivier leaned back, and something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "I want to see if it's possible," he said simply. "I want to know if what I believe about fragrance and perception is true." And he smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, warm and genuine. "I've admired your work for years, Mademoiselle Blanc. Your nose before the accident was extraordinary. The compositions you created for Maison Blanc were poetry. I would very much like to see what you might create with a different kind of perception." It was flattery, Simone knew. It was manipulation, probably. It was everything her rational mind screamed at her to be cautious about. But she was so tired of being cautious. So tired of the grey numbness that had swallowed her life. "What would it cost?" she asked. "Your time, your trust, your willingness to try." Olivier stood, offered his hand. "Stay in grace. Come here every day. Let me teach you. If after a month you feel it's hopeless, you can walk away. No payment, no obligation." Simone looked at his outstretched hand. She thought about her empty apartment in Paris. She thought about her grandmother's silent disappointment. She thought about the rest of her life stretching ahead, colorless and flat. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and he held on a beat longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a way that might have been deliberate or might have been nothing at all. "Good," he said. "We start tomorrow. 9 in the morning. Wear something comfortable. And Simone," the use of her first name sent a small shock through her, "leave your expectations at the door. What we're going to do won't look like perfumery as you know it, but I promise you, it will be extraordinary." That night, Simone checked into a small hotel near the old town and lay awake until dawn, her wrist pressed to her face, trying to capture some ghost of the patchouli that had been there hours ago. She felt nothing, but in her memory, she could still feel the tingle, the weight, the darkness, and for the first time in months, something that might have been hope flickered in her chest. She arrived at Olivier's house at 8:45 the next morning, too anxious to wait any longer. He opened the door already smiling like he'd known she'd be early, and ushered her inside. The studio looked different in morning light, less mysterious, more workmanlike. He'd cleared one of the tables completely, set out what looked like a tea service again, and several small bottles. "Coffee first," he said, pouring her a cup from a French press. "Then we begin." The coffee was strong, bitter, and Simone could taste nothing but the basic sensation of it, hot and dark. She drank it anyway, needing something to do with her hands. Olivier watched her over the rim of his own cup. "Tell me about the accident," he said. Simone stiffened. "I don't see how that's relevant." "Humor me." She set down her cup. "I was working on a modification to one of our classic formulas. Maison Blanc's signature rose. I wanted to deepen the base, add complexity. I was testing a new fixative, something synthetic. There was a reaction. That's all. What were you thinking about just before it happened? The question caught her off guard. I don't remember. Try. Simone closed her eyes, forced herself back to that moment. The laboratory, afternoon light slanting through high windows. Her hands steady on the beaker. The green solution. I was thinking, she said slowly, that my grandmother would hate it, the modification, that she'd say I was ruining something perfect by trying to improve it. I was thinking that I didn't care, that it was time for Maison Blanc to evolve, to take risks. I was thinking that I was tired of making the same fragrances we'd been making for 100 years. When she opened her eyes, Olivier was nodding. Good, he said. That anger, that frustration, that's important. Hold on to it. Why? Because creating fragrance isn't just technical skill. It's expression, emotion, desire. You lost your sense of smell, yes, but you didn't lose those things. We're going to rebuild your connection to perfume through them instead. He stood, moved to the cleared table. Come here. Simone joined him. On the table, he'd laid out 5 bottles, each filled with clear liquid, each unlabeled. These are all single-note fragrances, Olivier said. No blends, no complexity, just pure materials. I'm going to apply each one to your skin, and you're going to tell me what you experience. Not what you think you should smell, what you actually feel, taste, hear, sense. He picked up the first bottle, opened it. Your arm, please. Simone extended her left arm, palm up. Olivier took her hand in his, cradling it gently, and she was suddenly acutely aware of the warmth of his fingers, the calluses on his palm, the way his touch made her skin feel hypersensitive. He applied a drop to the inside of her elbow, and the cool shock of it made her inhale sharply. Don't rush, he murmured. Let it develop. His hand remained on her arm, his thumb resting just below where he'd applied the liquid. Simone focused on the spot, trying to feel what she couldn't smell. The coolness faded quickly, replaced by something. A sensation like mint, but not quite. A clarity, a sharpness. It feels clean, she said. Sharp, like the air after rain. Excellent. Olivier's thumb moved in a small circle against her skin, almost absent-minded. That's eucalyptus. High, penetrating, clarifying. You're responding to its camphoraceous quality, the way it affects your skin's receptors. Next one. He released her arm, and Simone felt the loss of his touch like a chill. The second application was on her other arm, and this time the sensation was completely different. Warm, almost burning, spreading from the point of contact. Hot, she said. It's hot and... She frowned, concentrating. Sweet? No, not sweet exactly, rich. Cinnamon. Olivier was standing very close now, watching her face intently. You're feeling the heat of the aldehyde, the molecular structure that triggers warmth receptors. Good. Very good. They continued through all 5 bottles, and with each one, Simone felt something inside her beginning to wake up, some part of her brain making new connections. She couldn't smell these materials, but she could experience them, could begin to differentiate them through sensation alone. By the time they finished, her arms were covered with invisible traces of fragrance, and she felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Enough for today, Olivier said, but he made no move to step away. Instead, he took both her hands, turned them palm up, studied the delicate skin of her wrists, where her pulse showed blue beneath the surface. You did well, better than I'd hoped. It's not the same, Simone said, and hated the crack in her voice. It's not enough. Not yet. His thumbs brushed across her wrists, a touch that felt deliberate now, intentional. But it will be. Trust me. She did, Simone realized. Against all logic, all caution, she trusted him. And that should have frightened her, but instead, it felt like the first real thing she'd experienced in months. The sessions became the center of Simone's days. She moved out of the hotel after the first week, renting a small apartment above a bakery 3 streets away from Olivier's studio. Every morning, she woke to the ghost of bread baking, a scent she knew existed but couldn't perceive, and walked through Grace's narrow streets to the green door that had become more familiar than home. Olivier's methods were unorthodox, to say the least. Some days they didn't touch fragrance materials at all. Instead, he would blindfold her and have her taste things, dozens of things, while he described their scent profiles. "Taste this," he'd say, placing something on her tongue. "Dark chocolate, 70% cacao. Now, if this were a perfume note, what would it be?" "Base note," Simone would answer, the bitterness spreading across her palate. "Deep, long-lasting. Something like vetiver maybe, or dark patchouli." "Good. And this?" A burst of citrus, bright and sharp. "Bergamot, top note, fleeting." He taught her to associate textures with fragrance families. Silk was aldehydic, cool and smooth like classic Chanel. Rough linen was aromatic, herbal, Mediterranean. Velvet was oriental, rich and heavy with spice. He would have her close her eyes and touch different fabrics while he applied corresponding fragrances to her skin, building connections between tactile sensation and olfactory memory. The work was intimate by necessity. Olivier's hands were constantly on her, applying materials to her wrists, her inner elbows, the soft skin behind her ears. He stood close, always close, his breath warm against her neck as he leaned in to observe her reactions. Simone told herself it was professional, that the electricity she felt whenever he touched her was just heightened sensitivity from the training. But there were moments when she caught him watching her with an expression that had nothing to do with perfume. Moments when his fingers would linger on her skin just a beat too long. Moments when the air between them felt charged with something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. 3 weeks into the training, Olivier changed tactics entirely. "We're going out," he announced one morning, forgoing their usual setup. "You need to experience fragrance in context, not just in isolation." He drove them into the hills above Grasse in a vintage Citroën that smelled, Simone imagined, of leather and gasoline and time. The fields were in bloom, acres of flowers stretching in geometric patterns across the landscape. Roses, jasmine, lavender, the raw materials of her lost world. Olivier parked at the edge of a jasmine field and led her into the rows of white flowers. "Close your eyes," he said, and she did. "Now just be here. Feel the sun, the breeze, the texture of the air." Simone stood motionless, trying to experience what she couldn't smell. The heat of the sun on her face, the way the breeze moved differently through the plants, creating pressure and release against her skin. And something else, something she couldn't quite name, a heaviness to the air that felt almost physical. "The jasmine is in full bloom," Olivier said from behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence like warmth at her back. "If you could smell it, it would be overwhelming, indolic, narcotic, almost obscenely floral. But even without smelling it, you can feel it, can't you? The weight of all that scent in the air, the way it changes the atmosphere." "Yes," Simone whispered, and it was true. She could feel something, a density, a presence. Olivier's hands came to rest on her shoulders. "This is what I want you to understand. Fragrance isn't just molecules triggering receptors. It's energy, it's presence. It affects the space around it, changes the air, changes the people in that space. You can still perceive that even if you can't smell it." He turned her to face him, his hands sliding from her shoulders to her upper arms. Simone opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "You're doing so well," he said softly. "Better than I imagined. You're not just learning to compensate for what you've lost. You're developing something new, something I've never seen before." "Olivier," she started, not knowing what she wanted to say, only that the weight of his hands on her arms and the look in his eyes were making it hard to breathe. He released her abruptly, stepping back, and the loss of contact was almost painful. "Come on," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I want to show you the rose fields." They spent the afternoon walking through different plantings, and Olivier taught her to identify flowers by the way they affected the air currents, by the subtle temperature changes around different blooms, by a dozen tiny cues Simone had never thought to notice before. By the time they returned to his studio as the sun was setting, she was exhausted, sunburned, and more alive than she'd felt since the accident. Olivier poured them both wine. A local rosé that Simone could taste was dry and mineral, even if she couldn't detect the subtle fruit notes he described. They sat in the leather chairs as the golden light faded from amber to rose to purple. "Thank you," Simone said, "for today, for all of this." Olivier swirled his wine, watching the light play through it. "I should be thanking you. You're proving my theories in ways I hadn't dared hope. Your theories about synesthetic perception, among other things." He looked at her over the rim of his glass. "I have a confession to make, Simone. When I wrote to you, it wasn't entirely altruistic. I've been developing a new approach to perfumery, one that takes into account all the sensory experiences surrounding fragrance, not just scent itself. You're helping me understand if it actually works. So I'm a test subject." Simone kept her voice light, but something in her chest tightened. "You're a collaborator." Olivier leaned forward, setting down his glass. "And if you're willing, I'd like to propose the next phase of your training, which is creation, not analysis, not perception, exercises, actual composition. I want to see if you can build a fragrance using the new sensory vocabulary you're developing." Simone's heart began to race. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You are, but there's a catch." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I want you to create something for me, a personal fragrance. You'll need to spend time with me, learn me, understand how I experience scent. It's an exercise I do with all my private clients, but it's intense, intimate, if that makes you uncomfortable." "It doesn't," Simone interrupted, and the truth of it thrilled and terrified her. "When do we start?" "Now, if you'd like." Olivier stood, offered his hand. Simone took it, let him pull her to her feet. He led her to a different area of the studio, one she'd noticed but never entered. It was separated from the main space by a sheer curtain, and when he pulled it aside, she saw what could only be described as a sanctuary. A low couch covered in silk cushions, soft lighting from paper lanterns, and tables covered with materials she recognized even if she couldn't smell them. "This is where I work with private clients," Olivier said. "Creating a personal fragrance is like creating a portrait. I need to understand every aspect of the person, their moods, their desires, their secrets." He gestured to the couch. "Sit. Get comfortable. This will take a while." Simone sank into the cushions, hyper-aware of the intimacy of the space, of Olivier settling beside her, close enough that their thighs almost touched. He had a leather notebook, and he opened it, pen poised. "Tell me," he said, "what you were like as a child, before perfume, before you knew what you'd become." And Simone found herself talking, telling him things she'd never told anyone. About growing up in the shadow of Maison Blanc, about her mother who died when she was 10, about the way her grandmother had pulled her into the laboratory one day and told her she had the gift, the nose, the talent that skipped generations and marked the chosen ones, about the pressure of that legacy, the weight of expectations, the way she'd both loved and resented being chosen. Olivier listened, occasionally asking questions, his pen moving across the page. As the evening deepened into night, he opened bottles periodically, applied traces to her skin, observed her reactions. But it felt different now, less clinical. Each touch lingered. Each application was accompanied by questions that went deeper, more personal. "What are you afraid of?" he asked, his fingers on the inside of her wrist. "Mediocrity," Simone answered without thinking. "Being ordinary, being forgotten. What do you desire most?" His thumb pressed against her pulse point, and Simone felt heat spread up her arm. To matter, to create something that lasts. "And what?" Olivier's voice dropped lower. "Do you want right now, in this moment?" Simone met his eyes, saw the want there naked and undisguised, and something inside her snapped. "You," she whispered. "I want you." The notebook fell to the floor. Olivier's hand moved from her wrist to her face, cupping her jaw, and then he was kissing her with a hunger that matched the one suddenly roaring through her veins. Simone gasped against his mouth, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until she couldn't think, could only feel. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her back, pulling her closer until she was half in his lap. She clutched at his shirt, desperate for more contact, more of this, more of him. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I shouldn't," Olivier said, his forehead pressed to hers. "This is unprofessional. You're my student, I don't care." Simone kissed him again, fierce and demanding. "I don't care about professional. I want this." Olivier made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a laugh. "You're going to ruin me," he murmured against her lips. Then his hands found the hem of her shirt, and coherent thought became impossible. They made love there on the silk cushions, surrounded by invisible fragrances and paper lantern light. Olivier touched her like she was precious, like she was art, his hands and mouth learning every inch of her with the same focused intensity he brought to perfume. And when he finally entered her, moving slow and deep and devastating, Simone felt something shift inside her. Some barrier breaking that had nothing to do with physical sensation and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Simone's head on Olivier's chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. She felt raw, exposed, more vulnerable than she'd felt since the accident, but she also felt alive, present, real in a way she'd forgotten was possible. "Stay," Olivier said quietly. "Tonight. Stay with me." Simone lifted her head, looked at him. His hair was mussed, his lips swollen from kissing, and she'd never seen anything more beautiful. "Yes," she said simply. He smiled, pulled her close, and they stayed like that as the night deepened around them. Two bodies warm in the darkness, surrounded by the ghost of 1,000 fragrances neither of them could name. The morning brought awkwardness, as mornings after first times always do. Simone woke alone in Olivier's bed upstairs, disoriented for a moment before memory returned in a rush of heat. She found her clothes neatly folded on a chair, dressed quickly, and ventured downstairs to find Olivier already in the studio, working at one of the tables as if nothing had changed. He looked up when she entered, and for a terrible moment, Simone thought he was going to pretend it hadn't happened. Then he smiled, warm and genuine, and crossed to her in 3 strides to kiss her good morning. "Coffee?" he asked against her lips. "Please." They fell into a new rhythm after that. By day, Simone was his student, learning to perceive and create fragrance through her developing synesthetic abilities. By night, she was his lover, learning a different kind of vocabulary in his bed. The two roles blurred and overlapped, became inseparable. Olivier would apply materials to her skin during training, and the touch would linger, would become a caress, would lead them back to the couch behind the curtain, or up the stairs to his bedroom. He taught her his body the way he taught her perfume, with patience and precision. He learned what made her gasp, what made her arch, what touches sent her over the edge. And Simone discovered that pleasure heightened her other senses, that in the aftermath of orgasm, when her nerves were singing and her defenses were down, she could perceive fragrances more clearly than ever through texture and sensation, and the sympathetic responses of her body. "You're magnificent," Olivier told her one evening, both of them tangled in his sheets, her body still trembling from climax. "Do you know that? You're creating an entirely new language for perfume. You're going to change everything." Simone turned her head to look at him, saw nothing but admiration and desire in his face. "We're creating it," she corrected. "Together." "Together," he agreed, and kissed her until she forgot her own name. 6 weeks after her arrival in Grasse, Simone finally felt ready to attempt a composition. Olivier had given her free rein of his materials, told her to create whatever spoke to her. She worked for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, building a fragrance through touch and taste and the new perception she'd developed. She couldn't smell what she was making, but she could feel it, could sense the balance and structure emerging. When she finally finished, exhausted and uncertain, she presented the bottle to Olivier with shaking hands. "I don't know if it's any good," she admitted. "I can't evaluate it the way I used to." Olivier took the bottle, uncapped it, applied it to his wrist. He closed his eyes, and Simone watched his face anxiously, trying to read his expression. He was silent for a long moment, and with each second that passed, her anxiety ratcheted higher. Finally, he opened his eyes, and Simone was startled to see they were bright with something that looked almost like tears. "It's extraordinary," he said quietly. "Simone, this is better than extraordinary. It's like nothing I've ever experienced." He pulled her close, kissed her hard. "You're a genius. You know that? A complete genius." Relief and joy flooded through her, so intense she felt dizzy. She'd done it. She'd created something real, something good, something that mattered. She wasn't lost after all. She wasn't finished. "I need to show someone," she said suddenly. "My grandmother. I need to prove to her that I'm not, that I can still—" "Of course." Olivier smoothed her hair back from her face. "Go. Show her. Let her see what you've accomplished." Simone kissed him once more, then practically ran from the studio, the bottle clutched in her hand like a talisman. She drove to Maison Blanc's headquarters on the outskirts of town, her heart hammering. She hadn't spoken to her grandmother since returning to Grasse, hadn't told her about the training, about Olivier, about any of it. Grandmère would disapprove, probably, would think it was foolish, impossible, a waste of time. But when Simone walked into the elegant office and set the bottle on the mahogany desk, when her grandmother lifted it with those weathered, capable hands and applied the fragrance and inhaled, something in the old woman's expression shifted. "Who made this?" Grandmère asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I did, with Olivier Deveraux's help, but Olivier Deveraux." Her grandmother set down the bottle, fixed Simone with a look she couldn't read. "I see. And tell me, chérie, what exactly has Monsieur Deveraux been teaching you?" Simone explained everything. The synesthetic training, the alternative perception methods, the way Olivier had taught her to experience fragrance through texture and taste and sensation. She didn't mention the intimacy, the nights in his bed, the way his hands felt on her skin. Some things were private, even from Grandmère. Her grandmother listened in silence, her expression inscrutable. When Simone finally finished, Grandmère picked up the bottle again, studied it in the afternoon light. "This is very good work," she said finally. "Sophisticated, mature, better, I think, than anything you created before the accident." She paused, and something flickered across her face. Olivier always had a gift for bringing out the best in people, for making them believe they could achieve the impossible. "You know him?" Simone asked, surprised. "I knew him. Many years ago. He trained here at Maison Blanc, before your time." Grandmère set down the bottle carefully. "He was brilliant, possibly the most talented nose I'd ever encountered. But he had ideas, theories about perfume that the other masters found. Unconventional. Eventually he left to pursue his own work." "Why didn't you ever mention him?" "Because he's dangerous, chérie." Grandmère's eyes, still sharp despite her 78 years, fixed on Simone with laser focus. "Not in the way you might think. Olivier doesn't mean harm, but he has a way of making people dependent on him, on his vision, on his approval. He creates devotion in his students that borders on obsession." Simone felt herself bristling. "He's helping me. He's given me back my craft when everyone else, including you, had written me off as finished. I never wrote you off." Grandmère's voice was soft but firm. "I told you to rest, to heal. I wanted to give you time before we discussed alternatives." "Alternatives to what?" "To being a perfumer. That's all I've ever been, all I ever wanted to be." "I know." Her grandmother stood, moved to the window overlooking the gardens, where Maison Blanc had grown its flowers for 5 generations. "Which is why I'm asking you to be careful, Simone. Olivier's methods may work. This fragrance proves that. But ask yourself why he chose you, why he reached out to you specifically, what he stands to gain from your success." The words planted a seed of doubt that Simone tried to ignore. "He gains nothing. He's doing this out of intellectual curiosity, because he believes in his theories. Perhaps." Grandmère turned back to face her. "Or perhaps he's using you to prove something, to validate himself, to show the industry that rejected his ideas that he was right all along. She moved closer, placed a gentle hand on Simone's cheek. I'm not saying stop working with him. I'm saying keep your eyes open. Remember that you are Simone Blanc, 5th-generation perfumer, with or without him. Your worth doesn't come from his validation. Simone left Maison Blanc feeling unsettled, the joy of her accomplishment tainted by her grandmother's warnings. She told herself Grand-mère was being overprotective, paranoid even, but the doubts gnawed at her as she drove back toward town. She found Olivier in the studio, working at his desk. He looked up when she entered, smiled that warm smile that always made her stomach flip. How did it go? He asked. She loved it. Said it was the best work I'd ever done. Simone set her bag down, moved toward him. She also told me you used to train at Maison Blanc, that you left because of disagreements about your theories. Something shuddered in Olivier's expression. That's true. The old guard didn't appreciate innovation. They were too invested in tradition to see that perfumery could evolve. Is that why you contacted me? Because of my connection to Maison Blanc? Because proving your theories with a Blanc would validate you in their eyes? Olivier stood, crossed to her in 2 strides. His hands came up to frame her face, tilting it so she had to meet his eyes. I contacted you because you're brilliant, because your work before the accident showed a creativity and daring that reminded me of myself at your age. Because when I heard what happened to you, I felt like the universe was giving me a chance to prove that my theories could actually help someone, could actually matter. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. Yes, there's satisfaction in proving the establishment wrong, but that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because you deserve another chance, because losing you to that accident would have been a tragedy for the entire world of perfume. Simone wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly her chest ached. My grandmother thinks you're dangerous, that you make people dependent on you. Olivier's jaw tightened. Your grandmother is bitter that I left her house, that I chose independence over her patronage. He released Simone's face, stepped back. But if you're having doubts, if you think I'm manipulating you, you're free to leave. I've never held anyone here against their will. That's not what I want. The words came out more desperate than Simone intended. I need to know this is real. That what we're doing, what we have, it's not just part of the training. Olivier's expression softened. He reached for her hand, brought it to his lips. What we have has nothing to do with perfume, he said quietly. I wanted you before I touched you. I want you now, and I'll want you long after this training is finished and you've gone back to your life. He kissed her palm, her wrist, the sensitive skin of her inner arm. Does that feel like manipulation? It felt like fire, like coming home, like everything she'd been missing without knowing it. Simone let him pull her close, let him kiss away her doubts, let him carry her upstairs to his bed, where he made love to her, with a tenderness that felt like both reassurance and apology. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, listening to his heartbeat slow, Simone pushed her grandmother's warnings to the back of her mind. This was real. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, if Olivier was using her, manipulating her, then she'd lost more than her sense of smell in that accident. She'd lost her ability to trust her own judgment. The next phase of training was the most challenging yet. Olivier wanted her to create a full collection, 3 fragrances that work together as a family, each one showcasing a different aspect of her synesthetic perception. It was the kind of project that would normally take months, but he pushed her to complete it in 6 weeks. Simone worked obsessively, barely sleeping, spending 14-hour days in the studio. Olivier was there with her, guiding and encouraging, but also demanding more, always more. He pushed her past what she thought were her limits, insisted she go deeper, take more risks, trust her instincts even when they terrified her. Some nights, she collapsed into bed too exhausted to do anything but sleep. Other nights, Olivier would pull her away from her work, insist she needed to rest, and seduce her with slow, deliberate attention until she forgot about formulas and materials and thought only about the way his hands felt on her body, the way he knew exactly how to make her come apart. The collection came together in pieces, each fragrance a revelation. The first was built around texture, a scent that felt like silk and shadow, and secrets whispered in darkness. The second was temperature, all coolness and clarity and sharp alpine air. The third was purely emotional, a composition that somehow conveyed longing and loss and the ache of desire unfulfilled. When she finally finished, Simone was hollow with exhaustion but vibrating with pride. These were good. No, more than good. These were extraordinary. She'd created something entirely new, a way of experiencing fragrance that transcended traditional perfumery. Olivier tested each one, his face carefully neutral, but Simone could read the tension in his shoulders, could see the way his hands trembled slightly as he made notes. When he finished with the third bottle, he set it down with exaggerated care and turned to look at her. "These are going to change everything," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Simone, you've done it. You've proven that perfume can be experienced, can be created, without traditional olfactory perception. This is revolutionary." "We did it," Simone corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "No." Olivier moved towards her, took both her hands in his. "This is your achievement, your vision. I just gave you the tools to access it." He paused, and something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly for Simone to read. "I want to show these, to present them at the International Perfume Conference in Paris next month. With your permission." Simone's heart leapt. The conference was the most prestigious event in the fragrance world, attended by everyone who mattered in the industry. To present there would mean recognition, validation, proof that she wasn't finished after all. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Absolutely yes." Olivier pulled her into his arms, held her tight. Against her hair, he murmured, "You're going to be famous, my brilliant girl. Everyone is going to know your name." The preparations for the conference consumed them both. Olivier insisted on managing all the details, the submissions, the presentation materials, the promotional strategy. Simone was content to let him, focused instead on refining the fragrances, making sure they were absolutely perfect. She barely noticed that she hadn't been to her apartment in days, that all her belongings had migrated to Olivier's house, that she'd become completely enmeshed in his world. She didn't think about Grandmère's warnings anymore. She thought only about the work, about the conference, about the future opening up before her like a flower in bloom. 3 weeks before they were scheduled to leave for Paris, Simone went to visit her grandmother, wanting to share the news in person. She found Grandmère in the laboratory at Maison Blanc, working on a formula with the concentration of someone half her age. "I'm presenting at the international conference," Simone announced, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "The collection I've been working on. Olivier thinks it's going to revolutionize perfumery." Her grandmother looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "Olivier is presenting, or you are. Both of us, together. It's a collaborative work." "I see." Grandmère set down her pipette with careful precision. "And these fragrances, the ones you're presenting, who owns them, Simone?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know. I made them, so I suppose. But you made them in Olivier's studio, with his materials, under his guidance." Grandmère's voice was gentle but relentless. "Have you signed any agreements, contracts, documentation of ownership?" Simone felt her stomach drop. "No, we didn't discuss it. I just assumed—" "Never assume, chérie. Not when it comes to intellectual property. Not when it comes to your work, your legacy." Her grandmother moved closer, placed both hands on Simone's shoulders. "I want you to ask Olivier about ownership, about credit, about what happens to these fragrances after the conference. And I want you to pay attention to how he responds. You don't trust him. I don't trust anyone when it comes to perfume." Grandmère smiled, but it was sad. "This industry, it's beautiful and it's brutal. People will steal your ideas, your formulas, your very signature if you let them. I learned that lesson the hard way many years ago. I don't want you to learn it the same way." Simone left Maison Blanc with her earlier excitement curdled into anxiety. She told herself her grandmother was being paranoid, that Olivier could never betray her like that. But the doubt had taken root, and it grew as she drove back to his house. She found him in the studio, packing materials for the trip to Paris. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course." Olivier turned to her, smiling. "What's wrong?" "The fragrances, the collection. I was wondering about the legal side of things, ownership, credit, that sort of thing." Something flickered in Olivier's eyes. There, and gone so fast, Simone almost missed it. "What about it?" "Well, I made them, so they're mine, right? I'll be credited as the creator." "Of course." Olivier set down the bottle he'd been holding, moved toward her. "Simone, why are you asking this? Did someone say something to you?" "My grandmother mentioned that I should make sure everything was documented. That's all." "Your grandmother?" Olivier's jaw tightened. "She's been poisoning you against me from the beginning, hasn't she? Planting doubts, making you question everything. She's just looking out for me. She's trying to control you, the same way she's controlled everyone at Maison Blanc for decades." Olivier took Simone's hands, his grip almost painful. "Listen to me. Everything we've created together, it's ours. Jointly. We're partners in this. I would never try to take credit for your work. Then you wouldn't mind signing something? Just a simple agreement clarifying ownership and credit?" Olivier's expression hardened. "You want it in writing, like you don't trust my word. It's not about trust. It's about being smart, about protecting myself. It's about your grandmother getting in your head." Olivier released her hands, stepped back. "Fine. You want a contract? I'll draft one. We can both sign it. But I want you to know that this hurts, Simone. That you would doubt me after everything we've been through, everything I've done for you." Guilt washed over her, sharp and immediate. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I just wanted to make sure everything was clear." "It's clear." Olivier's voice was cold. "Crystal clear. You don't trust me." He turned away, back to his packing, and the dismissal was obvious. Simone stood there for a moment, feeling like she'd broken something precious, then retreated upstairs to give him space. She spent the evening alone, replaying the conversation, wondering if she'd overreacted, if she'd damaged what they had over legal paranoia. When Olivier finally came to bed, hours later, he didn't touch her. He lay on his side of the bed, facing away, and the distance between them felt like an ocean. "Olivier," Simone whispered into the darkness. "I'm sorry. It's fine." But his voice was tight. "Go to sleep." She lay awake for hours, miserable and confused. By morning, she'd convinced herself she'd been foolish, that Grand-Mère's paranoia had made her sabotage the best thing in her life. When Olivier got up without kissing her, without even looking at her, Simone felt panic claw at her throat. "Please don't be angry," she said. "I trust you. I do. Forget about the contract. I don't need it." Olivier paused in the doorway, looked back at her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I'm sorry I even brought it up." His expression softened. He crossed back to the bed, sat on the edge, reached out to tuck her hair behind her ear. "I'm not angry," he said quietly. "I'm hurt. There's a difference. But I understand. Your grandmother has been in your ear, making you doubt yourself, doubt us. It's not your fault." He leaned down, kissed her forehead. "We're partners, Simone, equal partners. I would never take advantage of you." Relief flooded through her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you. For understanding. For being patient with me. Always." He kissed her properly this time, deep and slow. "Now get dressed. We have work to do." The weeks leading up to the conference passed in a blur. Olivier was attentive again, affectionate, but something had shifted. He was more careful with her, like she was fragile, likely to break. Or maybe, Simone thought, with growing unease, like she was something he needed to handle delicately to keep from losing. She pushed the thought away. She focused on the work, on the presentation, on the future she could see opening before them. They would present the collection. The industry would embrace it. She would be recognized as an innovator, a creator who'd overcome impossible odds. And she and Olivier would continue working together, pushing the boundaries of what perfume could be. It was a beautiful vision, and Simone believed in it with everything she had. because the alternative, that she'd been wrong about him, wrong about all of it, was too terrible to contemplate. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave for Paris, a courier arrived at Olivier's house with a thick envelope. Legal documents, Olivier explained. Just standard contracts for the conference presentation. He spread them on the table, gestured for Simone to read through them. She tried. She really did. But legal language had never been her strength, and after 3 pages of dense text, her eyes started to glaze. "Can you just summarize?" she asked. "It's standard stuff. Rights to present the work, liability waivers, that sort of thing." Olivier flipped to the last page, pointed to a signature line. "Just sign here." Simone picked up the pen. She was halfway through writing her name when some instinct made her pause. "This doesn't say anything about ownership, does it? It's not about ownership. It's about presentation rights. But my name is on it, right? As the creator?" "Of course." Olivier's voice was patient, but Simone caught a flash of something in his eyes. Irritation, anxiety. "We've been through this, Simone. We're co-creators. Both our names are on everything. Can I see where it says that?" Olivier ran a hand through his hair. "You really are your grandmother's granddaughter, aren't you? Fine, look." He flipped back through the pages, pointed to a section. "Right there. Creative collaboration between Olivier Deveraux and Simone Blanc. Happy?" Simone read the section. It did say that, but something about the phrasing nagged at her. Something about the way it was structured. "What does 'under the artistic direction of Olivier Deveraux' mean?" "It means I directed the project, which I did. I taught you, guided you, provided the framework for your learning. But I created the fragrances, using my methods, my materials, my studio." Olivier's voice had taken on an edge. "Simone, what is this about? You're acting like I'm trying to steal from you. I just want to make sure I understand what I'm signing. Then read it. Take all the time you need. But we need these documents filed by tomorrow if we're going to present." He stood abruptly. "I'll be in the studio. Sign them when you're ready, or don't. It's your choice." He left, and Simone sat staring at the papers, her heart pounding. She should read them carefully. She should probably have a lawyer look at them. But that would mean admitting she didn't trust Olivier. Would mean opening a rift between them right before the most important presentation of her life. And the truth was, most of what the document said was probably true. He had directed the project. He had provided the framework. Without him, she'd still be in Paris, hollow and hopeless, unable to create anything at all. She signed her name, told herself she was being smart, being practical, told herself that Olivier loved her, that he would never hurt her. She almost believed it. Paris in October was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made Simone's chest ache with nostalgia and possibility. She and Olivier checked into a hotel near the Palais Garnier where the conference was being held. A boutique place with Art Nouveau details and a view of the Opera House's golden dome. Their room had a large bed with crisp white linens, and the first night there, Olivier made love to her with a desperation that felt almost like goodbye. Simone clung to him, trying to ignore the sense of foreboding that had been building in her chest since they'd left Grasse. "I love you," she whispered against his shoulder, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Olivier went still. For a terrible moment, he said nothing. Then he pulled back to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "I love you too," he said finally. "More than I probably should." It wasn't quite the response Simone had hoped for, but she took it anyway, held it close, told herself it was enough. The conference opened the next morning with a keynote address from one of the industry's grand masters, a man whose work had defined modern perfumery for 30 years. Simone sat in the audience next to Olivier, surrounded by people she'd admired her entire career, and felt imposter syndrome crash over her in waves. What was she doing here? She couldn't even smell anymore. Who was she to think she could revolutionize anything? Olivier's hand found hers, squeezed. "Breathe," he murmured. "You belong here, more than any of them." Their presentation was scheduled for the second day in one of the smaller conference rooms. Simone had expected an intimate gathering, maybe 20 or 30 people. Instead, when they arrived to set up, She found the room packed, standing room only, at least 200 people crammed into a space meant for half that. "What's going on?" she asked Olivier, anxiety spiking. Word got out. He was grinning, practically vibrating with excitement. "About what we're presenting. Everyone wants to see it." Simone scanned the crowd, looking for friendly faces. She spotted several perfumers she recognized, journalists from industry publications, even a few celebrities known for their signature scents. And there, in the third row, her grandmother, sitting ramrod straight with an expression that sent a chill down Simone's spine. She hadn't known Grand-Mère was coming, hadn't even mentioned the presentation to her after their last tense conversation. But of course she was here. Of course she would be. Olivier took the podium first, his voice smooth and confident as he introduced the project. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're about to share with you represents a fundamental reimagining of perfumery itself. For centuries, we've believed that the ability to smell was essential to creating fragrance. Today, we're going to prove that assumption wrong." He told Simone's story, the accident, the loss, the struggle. He made it sound heroic, tragic, a phoenix rising from ashes. Simone stood to the side, feeling exposed, vulnerable, as Olivier revealed her disability to the entire room. "Working with Mademoiselle Blanc," Olivier continued, "I've developed a methodology for experiencing and creating fragrance through synesthetic perception. She cannot smell these perfumes, but she can feel them, taste them, sense them through alternative neural pathways. And what she's created is nothing short of revolutionary." He gestured to Simone, and she moved to join him at the podium, her legs shaking. They'd rehearsed this. She was supposed to talk about her process, about how she'd learned to perceive fragrance differently. But looking out at all those faces, she felt her carefully prepared words evaporate. "I was broken," she heard herself say instead. "Or I thought I was. I thought losing my sense of smell meant losing everything that mattered. But Olivier taught me that perfume is more than molecules and receptors. It's energy, presence, the way scent changes the space around it. And even without smelling, I could still feel that, could still create it." She demonstrated, applying the fragrances to volunteers from the audience, asking them to describe what they experienced. The responses were extraordinary. People described sensations of texture, temperature, emotional responses that went beyond traditional scent description. One woman said the first fragrance made her skin feel like it was humming. A man said the second one tasted of winter mornings. A journalist from Vogue said the third one made her want to cry, though she couldn't explain why. The room was silent when they finished, and for a terrible moment, Simone thought they'd failed. Then the applause started, thunderous and sustained, people rising to their feet. Simone felt tears sting her eyes as she looked out at the standing ovation, at the recognition and validation she'd thought she'd never have again. Olivier pulled her close, kissed her temple. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." The rest of the day was a blur of congratulations, questions, business cards pressed into her hands. Perfume houses wanted to license the technology. Journalists wanted interviews. Other perfumers wanted to learn the method. It was everything Simone had dreamed of, and more. Through it all, she kept catching glimpses of her grandmother, always at the edge of the crowd, watching with that inscrutable expression. Finally, as the conference hall was emptying for the evening reception, Grand-Mère approached. "That was quite a presentation," she said. "Thank you." Simone searched her grandmother's face for approval, for pride, and found only careful neutrality. "I hoped you'd be pleased. I'm pleased you found a way to continue working." Grand-Mère glanced at Olivier, who was across the room talking animatedly with a group of industry executives. "I'm less pleased about how much credit Monsieur Deveraux is taking for your achievements. We're partners. We did this together." "Did you?" Grand-Mère's eyes, still sharp despite her age, fixed on Simone. "Tell me, chérie, in all those conversations Olivier is having right now, how many times has he said Simone created versus we developed? How many of those business cards are being given to you versus him?" Simone glanced over at Olivier, really looked. He was holding court, surrounded by admirers, talking with his hands, gesticulating enthusiastically. And Grand-mère was right. The business cards were being handed to him. The questions were being directed to him. Simone was mentioned, certainly, but always as his student, his project, his methodology applied. "He's just better at networking," Simone said, but even she could hear the doubt in her voice. "Perhaps." Grand-mère reached into her purse, pulled out a folded document. "Or perhaps you should read this before you commit yourself any further to this partnership." Simone took the paper, unfolded it. It was a patent application filed 3 weeks ago. "Method and apparatus for synesthetic fragrance creation," she read aloud. "Inventor, Olivier Deveraux." She looked up at her grandmother, confused. "What is this?" "It's Olivier claiming ownership of the methodology you've been using, the techniques, the approach, everything. It's dated before your presentation, which means he filed it before telling you." Grand-mère's voice was gentle but relentless. "He's making sure that even if you created the fragrances, he owns the process. Anyone who wants to use synesthetic perfumery will have to license it from him, including you." Simone felt the floor drop out from under her. "No, he wouldn't. We're partners," he said. "What did the contract you signed say, Simone?" The contract. The one she'd signed without reading carefully, trusting Olivier's summary, trusting him. I don't remember exactly. I think you should find out." Grand-mère squeezed her arm gently. "I'm staying at the Ritz, room 412. Come see me after you've talked to Olivier. Whatever you decide, whatever you need, I'm here." She left, and Simone stood frozen, the patent application crumpling in her shaking hand. This had to be a misunderstanding. Olivier couldn't betray her like this. They loved each other. They were building something together. But Grand-mère's words had planted seeds of doubt that grew rapidly into full-blown panic. Simone thought about the contract, the careful phrasing, under the artistic direction of Olivier Deveraux. She thought about all the conversations where he'd said "we," but meant himself. She thought about how completely she'd given herself over to him, his world, his vision, his control. She made it through the reception on autopilot, smiling and nodding while her mind raced. Olivier was ebullient, riding high on their success, introducing her to everyone important while somehow always keeping himself at the center of attention. By the time they returned to their hotel room, Simone felt like she was vibrating out of her skin. "What a day," Olivier said, pouring them both champagne. "Did you see the interest? The offer's already coming in. This is going to be huge, Simone, life-changing." "I need to ask you something." Simone didn't take the champagne he offered. "My grandmother showed me a patent application for synesthetic fragrance creation, filed in your name only." Olivier's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Ah, yes, I was going to tell you about that." "When? Before or after you owned the rights to my entire method of working?" "It's not like that." Olivier set down the champagne glasses carefully. "The patent is for the methodology, the teaching framework, not for the fragrances themselves. Those are still yours. But anyone who wants to use my techniques has to pay you. It's standard practice, Simone. When you develop a new technology, you protect it. That's how the industry works." "But we developed it together. My name should be on that patent too." "You didn't develop the methodology, I did. You were the test case, the proof of concept. An extraordinarily successful one, but..." He stopped, seemed to realize how that sounded. "What I mean is, the theoretical framework, the scientific basis, that's my work. Your fragrances are yours. It's a fair division." Simone felt something inside her crack. "Is that what I am to you? A test case? Proof of concept? Don't do this." Olivier moved toward her, hands raised placatingly. "Don't let your grandmother poison this. She's jealous, Simone. Jealous that I succeeded where Maison Blanc failed. Jealous that you chose me over her. I didn't choose you over her. I chose you because I thought you cared about me, about helping me, not about using me to validate your theories and make yourself famous. I do care about you." Olivier's voice dropped, became the intimate tone he used in bed. "I love you. You know that. This, the patent, the business side, it's completely separate from what we have personally. Is it?" Simone pulled out the contract she'd signed, the one she'd been carrying in her purse. What does this really say, Olivier? In language I can understand. He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. It's a standard collaboration agreement. Standard how? It specifies that the fragrances were created under my artistic direction, using my methodologies and materials. We share credit, but, he paused, I retain ownership and licensing rights. The words hit Simone like a physical blow. You own my fragrances. Legally, they were created in my studio, with my materials, under my guidance. That makes them, technically, my intellectual property. But Simone, you'll still be credited. You'll still benefit. This is just about protecting the work. Protecting it from me, you mean? Simone's voice was shaking. You never intended for this to be a partnership. You saw a woman who'd lost everything, who was desperate and vulnerable, and you used me. You seduced me, made me dependent on you, made me trust you, all so you could steal my work. That's not true. But Olivier's face had gone cold now, defensive. I gave you everything. Training, resources, a chance to work again when no one else would give you the time of day. Without me, you'd still be rotting in Paris, useless and forgotten. Everything you've accomplished, you owe to me. The mask had finally slipped. Simone saw him clearly now, saw the calculation behind his warmth, the manipulation behind his support. Did you ever love me? She asked quietly. Or was that part of the method too? Keep the test subject emotionally invested so she doesn't ask too many questions. Something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across Olivier's face. I do love you. I did from the start. But that doesn't change the reality of intellectual property law. You can hate me for it, but every document you signed is legal and binding. The methodology is mine. The fragrances created using it are mine, and there's nothing you can do about it. Simone felt numb, hollowed out. She thought about the accident, about the long months of despair afterward. She'd believed she'd lost everything in that explosion, but she'd been wrong. She'd still had her dignity, her autonomy, her sense of self. Those were the things she'd actually lost, slowly, piece by piece, in Olivier's bed, in his studio, in his carefully constructed world where she was always his student, his project, his creation. I'm leaving, she said. Simone, wait. Let's talk about this rationally. There's nothing to talk about. You used me. You lied to me. And I let you, because I was so desperate to be whole again that I couldn't see what you were doing. She grabbed her bag, started throwing clothes into it. I hope it was worth it, Olivier. I hope proving your theories and claiming my work makes you happy. Because you've lost anything real we might have had. You need me. Olivier's voice had gone hard now. All pretense of affection gone. Without my methodology, you can't create. You can't work. You're still damaged, still broken, and I'm the only one who knows how to fix you. Simone stopped packing, turned to face him. No, she said clearly. You taught me techniques. But the perception, the creativity, the ability to create despite my disability, that's mine. It always was. You just convinced me I needed you to access it. She zipped her bag, slung it over her shoulder. I don't need you. I never did. I just needed to believe in myself. And that's the one thing you could never give me, because keeping me dependent was always the point. She walked out, and Olivier didn't try to stop her. Why would he? He'd already gotten what he wanted. Simone made it to the hotel lobby before she started shaking. She stood outside in the cool October night, trying to breathe, trying to process what had just happened. Everything she'd believed for the past 3 months had been a lie. Everything she'd felt, everything she'd given, had been manipulated and exploited. She pulled out her phone, stared at it for a long moment. Then she called her grandmother. I'm coming to you, she said when Grandmère answered. And I need a lawyer, the best intellectual property lawyer you know. I'll make the calls, her grandmother said immediately. Simone, I'm sorry. I wish I'd been wrong. Me too. Simone's voice broke. Me too. She took a taxi to the Ritz, and Grandmère was waiting in the lobby, arms open. Simone walked into that embrace, and finally let herself cry. Great racking sobs for everything she'd lost, everything she'd given away, everything she'd believed. "Hush, chérie," Grand-mère murmured, stroking her hair. "We'll fix this. We'll fight him. We'll get back what's yours." But lying in the guest bed in her grandmother's suite later that night, staring at the ceiling, Simone wasn't sure anything could be fixed. Olivier owned her fragrances legally. He owned the methodology. And even if they fought, even if they somehow won, the damage was done. The industry would always remember her as Olivier Deveraux' student, his project, his proof of concept. She'd wanted to matter, to create something that lasted. Instead, she'd become a footnote in someone else's success story. The worst part was that she'd seen it coming. Grand-mère had warned her. The doubts had been there, but she'd ignored them all because she'd wanted so badly to believe that someone could love her, broken as she was, that someone could see past her disability to the artist. Underneath, Olivier had seen the artist. He just hadn't cared about the person. Simone pressed her hands to her face, feeling the absence of scent like a phantom limb. She couldn't smell the luxury soap Grand-mère had left in the bathroom, couldn't smell the flowers on the nightstand, couldn't smell anything at all, but she could feel. And what she felt, underneath the grief and betrayal and rage, was something else. Something harder, sharper, more dangerous. Determination. Olivier thought he'd won, thought he'd taken everything from her, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing. Simone Blanc had been creating perfume since before she could write her name. It was in her blood, her bones, her DNA passed down through 5 generations of master perfumers. Olivier had taught her to access her gift differently, but the gift itself had never been his to give or take. She sat up in bed, pulled out her phone, started making notes. Ideas, formulas, approaches. She couldn't fight Olivier legally, probably. The contracts were too tight, the patent too broad. But she could create, could prove that she didn't need him, didn't need his methodology, didn't need anything but her own brilliant, damaged, resilient mind. She would show the world exactly what Simone Blanc could do, and Olivier Deveraux would spend the rest of his life knowing he'd had a chance to be part of something real, something extraordinary, and he'd chosen to exploit it instead. By the time dawn broke over Paris, Simone had the skeleton of a plan. It would take time, resources, connections she didn't have yet, but she'd find them. She'd build them. She'd lost her sense of smell in an accident. She'd lost her heart to a liar, but she hadn't lost herself. Not completely. Not yet. And that, Simone thought as the first light touched the Parisian rooftops, was going to have to be enough. The legal battle lasted 6 months and cost more than Simone wanted to think about. Grand-mère hired the best intellectual property lawyers in France, and they fought viciously, but the contracts Simone had signed were airtight. Olivier retained ownership of the 3 fragrances she'd created in his studio and the exclusive rights to license the synesthetic methodology. The best they could negotiate was that Simone's name would appear as co-creator, and she'd receive a small percentage of any licensing fees. It was a humiliating defeat, dressed up as a minor victory. Simone moved back to Grasse, not to her old apartment, but to a small cottage on Maison Blanc's property. Grand-mère offered her a position in the laboratory, not out of pity, but out of pragmatism. "We need innovation," she said, "and you, despite everything, have learned to innovate." The work was difficult at first. Being back in a traditional perfumery, surrounded by people who could smell, who took their olfactory perception for granted, made Simone feel her disability more acutely than ever. But she persisted, applying the techniques Olivier had taught her, developing new ones of her own. Slowly, painfully, she began to create again. Her fragrances were different now, darker, more complex, less interested in pleasing and more interested in provoking. The industry noticed. Within a year, Maison Blanc's new collection, Les Sons Perdus, was being hailed as a triumph. Within 2 years, Simone had been featured in every major fragrance publication, always with the backstory of her accident, her recovery, her innovative approach. She tried not to think about Olivier, tried not to follow his career, His success built on the methodology they'd developed together, but it was impossible to avoid completely. He was everywhere, presenting at conferences, consulting for major houses, always careful to mention Simone in interviews as his former student and collaborator. The words tasted like ash every time she read them. 3 years after Paris, Grandmère called Simone into her office. "I need to tell you something," she said, and something in her tone made Simone's stomach drop. "About Olivier. About why I warned you away from him. I don't want to talk about him. You need to hear this." Grandmère gestured to the chair across from her desk, waited until Simone sat. "I told you Olivier trained here that he left because of disagreements about his theories. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "There was a woman, another student, brilliant, with a nose that rivaled yours. Olivier became involved with her romantically. He was developing his theories about synesthetic perception even then, though less refined. She became his test subject, his muse, his obsession." Simone felt cold spreading through her chest. What happened to her? He pushed her too hard. Experimental compounds, sensory deprivation exercises, techniques that bordered on psychological manipulation. She had a breakdown. Complete psychotic break. She's been institutionalized for 25 years now. Grandmère's eyes were sad, ancient. Her name was Marguerite. "She was my daughter, your mother." The world tilted. Simone gripped the arms of the chair, trying to process what she just heard. "No, you said my mother died when I was 10. You said it was cancer." "I lied. I wanted to protect you from the truth, from the knowledge that she was alive but lost to us." Grandmère's voice was steady, but tears tracked down her weathered cheeks. "Marguerite didn't die, but the woman she was, the artist she could have been, that died in Olivier's studio. When I discovered what he'd done to her, I banned him from Maison Blanc, made sure everyone in the industry knew he was dangerous. He disappeared after that, worked privately, built his reputation slowly and carefully. And when he contacted me, he knew exactly who you were. He'd been following your career, waiting for the right moment. When you had the accident, when you were vulnerable and desperate, he saw his opportunity. Another Blanc daughter, another chance to prove his theories, to redeem himself." Grandmère leaned forward. "I tried to warn you without telling you the full truth. I was afraid. I was afraid if you knew about your mother, it would destroy you. But keeping silent almost destroyed you anyway." Simone felt numb, disconnected from her body, her mother, alive all these years. Alive but lost, broken by the same man who'd tried to break Simone. "I want to see her. Simone, I want to see my mother." Grandmère made the arrangements, and 2 days later, Simone found herself walking through the grounds of a private psychiatric facility outside Lyon. The building was elegant, expensive, the kind of place where wealthy families put relatives they couldn't cure, but could afford to keep comfortable. Marguerite Blanc sat in a sunroom, looking out at a garden she probably couldn't really see. She was 53 but looked older, her hair grey, her face lined with the residue of decades of antipsychotic medications. When the nurse introduced Simone, Marguerite turned her head slowly, her eyes unfocused. "Maman," Simone said softly, kneeling beside her mother's chair. "It's me, Simone, your daughter." Marguerite's eyes focused for a moment, and something that might have been recognition flickered there. "Simone," she murmured. "Little Simone, you smell like roses." Simone felt tears burn her eyes. She couldn't smell like roses. She couldn't smell like anything. But her mother, trapped in whatever reality the breakdown had left her, thought she could perceive it. "Yes," Simone whispered. "Roses, your favorite. He put them everywhere." Marguerite's voice was distant, dreamy. "Olivier, he said roses would help me smell in color, see in scent. He gave me things, drinks that tasted like metal and thunder. He said I was perfect, that I was going to change everything." Her hand moved to touch Simone's face, the gesture clumsy. But I couldn't stop smelling, couldn't turn it off. Every breath was 1,000 fragrances, all screaming. I begged him to make it stop, but he kept giving me more, kept pushing, kept saying we were so close. Simone took her mother's hand, held it gently. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you." "You have my nose," Marguerite said, suddenly lucid. "Grand-mère told me. She visits sometimes. She said you're brilliant, like I was supposed to be." Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't let him take it from you, little one. Don't let him steal what makes you special." "I won't," Simone promised, even though it was too late. Even though Olivier had already taken so much. She visited her mother every week after that, bringing fragrances from Maison Blanc's collection, even though Marguerite couldn't smell them anymore. Even though the medications had dulled all her senses to nothing. They sat together in the sunroom, and Simone described what she was creating, what she was learning, how she was building a career from the ruins Olivier had left. Marguerite didn't always understand, but sometimes, in moments of clarity, she'd smile and say, "Good, that's good. Make him regret what he did. Make him sorry he ever met a Blanc daughter." Simone intended to. 5 years after Paris, Simone received an invitation to present at the International Perfume Conference again. This time, she'd be showcasing Maison Blanc's newest collection, created entirely by her, featuring her innovative approaches to composition. She accepted, even though she knew Olivier would be there, even though the thought of seeing him made her feel physically ill. Grand-mère insisted on coming with her. "For support," she said, "and because I want to see his face when he realizes you've surpassed him." The conference was in Monaco this time, all glittering excess and Mediterranean light. Simone's presentation was scheduled for the main ballroom, prime placement, the kind of slot reserved for industry legends. She stood backstage, listening to the introduction, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. Then she was walking onto the stage, facing hundreds of people, and there, in the third row, exactly where Grand-mère had sat 5 years ago, was Olivier. He'd aged well, still handsome, still charismatic, but there was something tired in his eyes, something hungry that hadn't been there before. Simone didn't acknowledge him. She launched into her presentation, discussing her latest collection, demonstrating her techniques. She talked about her mother, about the accident, about learning to create despite disability. She was honest about using synesthetic methods, credited the theoretical framework to early collaborations, but made it clear that what she was showing now was entirely her own work, her own innovation, her own art. The response was thunderous. People crowded around her afterward, wanting to touch the fragrances, to commission work, to learn from her. And through it all, Simone kept catching glimpses of Olivier at the edges, watching, waiting. He finally approached as the crowd was thinning, his smile carefully neutral. "Simone, that was extraordinary. Truly, you've exceeded even my highest expectations. No thanks to you." Simone's voice was ice. "I know you're angry. Angry doesn't begin to cover it." She looked at him directly for the first time. Let him see the hatred in her eyes. "You used me. You stole from me. And worse, you did the same thing to my mother 25 years ago. You broke her mind trying to prove your theories. And when I came along, you saw a chance to do it right this time." Olivier's facade cracked. "Your mother was unstable before I met her. The techniques I used drove her insane. She's been institutionalized for 25 years because of you." Simone stepped closer, lowered her voice. "I visit her every week. She still has moments where she remembers what you did to her, where she relives the horror of having her perception manipulated until she couldn't distinguish reality anymore. I never meant, you meant exactly what happened. You've always been willing to sacrifice anyone to prove you're right, to validate your genius." Simone felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. "But here's what you didn't count on. Blanc women are stronger than you think. You broke my mother, but you didn't destroy her legacy. She lives on through me, and I'm everything you tried to make her, everything you tried to make me, except I'm free of you. I'm successful without you. And that must kill you." Olivier's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't have anything without my methods, without what I taught you. You taught me techniques. I taught myself to survive you." Simone started to turn away, then paused. "Oh, and Olivier, that collection you're presenting tomorrow, The one using your synesthetic methodology with a new student. What about it? I heard she's brilliant, young, vulnerable, recovering from trauma, just your type. Simone smiled, and it wasn't kind. I sent her copies of all my legal documents, the contracts I signed with you, and I told her my story, my mother's story. I told her exactly what you are and what you do to the women who trust you. Olivier's face went white. You had no right. I had every right. I won't let you do to her what you did to us. Simone leaned in close, whispered. She withdrew from the presentation this morning. Sent her fragrance formulas to your competitors instead. You might want to check your email. She walked away before he could respond, feeling lighter than she had in years. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance what he'd taken from her mother. But it was something. Grandmère was waiting by the exit, and they walked out together into the Monaco sunlight. Feel better? Grandmère asked. A little. Simone linked her arm through her grandmother's. It's not enough, though. He'll just find another student, another vulnerable woman to exploit. Perhaps. Grandmère smiled, and there was something dangerous in it. Or perhaps word will spread. Perhaps other women he's hurt will come forward. Perhaps his reputation will slowly crumble, and he'll spend his remaining years watching his legacy die. She squeezed Simone's arm. Revenge doesn't have to be dramatic, chérie. Sometimes the slow destruction is more satisfying. They returned to Grasse, and Simone threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. She published articles about her techniques, gave workshops, made sure anyone who wanted to learn could access the methods without having to go through Olivier. She became vocal about ethical treatment of students, about the importance of clear contracts and fair credit. And slowly, women started reaching out to her. Other perfumers who'd trained with Olivier, who'd had similar experiences. Not all as extreme as hers or her mother's, but the same pattern of seduction, manipulation, exploitation. They formed a quiet network, sharing information, warning potential students, making sure everyone knew what working with Olivier Deveraux really meant. His reputation didn't collapse overnight, but it began to tarnish. Fewer students sought him out. Conference invitations became less frequent. The industry, always hungry for the next scandal, began to whisper. 3 years after Monaco, Simone was working late in the Maison Blanc laboratory when her phone rang. An unknown Paris number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Simone. The voice was familiar, aged, but unmistakable. Olivier. She kept her voice neutral. What do you want? I need to speak with you. It's important. He sounded different, desperate. Please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't. Goodbye, Olivier. I'm dying. Simone's finger hovered over the disconnect button. What? Cancer, pancreatic. They're giving me 3 months, maybe 4. He coughed. A wet, painful sound. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to tell you something. Something you deserve to know. Against her better judgment, against every instinct screaming at her to hang up, Simone said, I'm listening. The accident, your accident, the one that took your sense of smell. Olivier's voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't an accident. The laboratory seemed to tilt around her. What are you talking about? I caused it. I paid a lab technician at Maison Blanc to tamper with the chemicals you were using, to create a reaction that would damage your olfactory nerves without killing you. He was crying now. She could hear it. I wanted to recreate what happened with your mother, but controlled this time. I wanted to take a brilliant perfumer and teach her to perceive differently, to prove that my methods worked. But I needed you to be desperate first, needed you to have nowhere else to turn. Simone couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. You're lying. I wish I were. I have documents, emails, bank transfers. I kept everything just in case. I'll send them to you. I needed you to hear it from me first. He took a ragged breath. I destroyed your life so I could rebuild it according to my vision. I did the same thing to your mother. Different methods, but same intent. I'm a monster, Simone. I know that now. And I needed you to know the truth before I die. Why? Simone's voice broke. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. because you deserve to decide what to do with that knowledge. Expose me, sue me, whatever you want. I'm dying anyway, but I couldn't. I couldn't go to my grave with you thinking you were just unlucky, with you not knowing that everything, all of it, was orchestrated. The line went dead. Simone sat frozen in the laboratory for an hour before she could move. When she finally did, it was to drive to Grandma's house, where she broke down completely, sobbing in her grandmother's arms like she hadn't since she was a child. He took everything, she kept saying. My nose, my career, my ability to trust. He took it all deliberately. He destroyed me on purpose. I know, chérie, I know. The documents arrived the next day. Everything Olivier had promised. Emails to the lab technician, bank transfers, detailed plans for controlled olfactory trauma. It was all there, evidence of a conspiracy that had destroyed Simone's life. Grandmère wanted to go to the police, to prosecute, to make sure Olivier spent his remaining days in prison. But Simone stopped her. No, she said. I have a better idea. She spent the next week in her laboratory at Maison Blanc, working obsessively. When she emerged, she had a single bottle, elegant and simple. What is it? Grandmère asked. A fragrance. My masterpiece. Simone held the bottle up to the light. I'm going to send it to Olivier. Tell him it's a gift, a gesture of forgiveness before he dies. It's built entirely on the synesthetic principles he taught me, the culmination of everything we discovered together. Simone, what did you do? Nothing illegal. Nothing that will kill him. At least not directly. Simone smiled, and it was terrible. But the compounds in this fragrance, they're designed to bind to neural receptors in a very specific way. For someone with a functioning sense of smell, particularly a trained perfumer's nose, it will create the most exquisite experience. Every breath will be paradise. Every note will be perfection. It will be addictive, intoxicating, the most beautiful thing he's ever smelled. And it will slowly damage his olfactory nerves. Not immediately, not obviously, but over weeks of repeated exposure, it will destroy his sense of smell completely. He'll lose the one thing he values most, the same way he made me lose it. Simone set the bottle down carefully. He'll spend his last months alive but unable to smell, watching his greatest gift die before his body does. Poetic justice. Grandmère looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. You've become like him, she said quietly. You've let your anger turn you into what you hate. Maybe. Simone didn't look away. Or maybe I'm just giving him what he deserves. What he gave me and my mother. I'm using his own methods against him, letting him experience what he did to us. And then what? You send this to him. You destroy what's left of him. And then what? Does it heal you? Does it bring back what you lost? Simone picked up the bottle again, held it, felt its weight in her palm. She thought about her mother in the facility, still broken after 25 years. She thought about herself in Paris, devastated and betrayed. She thought about all the other women Olivier had used and discarded in his pursuit of validation. She thought about the person she'd been before the accident, before Olivier, before everything went wrong. Then she threw the bottle against the wall. It shattered, and even though Simone couldn't smell it, she imagined the fragrance spreading through the air, poisonous and beautiful. Wasted. Grandmère pulled her close as she sobbed, great racking cries that shook her entire body. I wanted to, Simone gasped. I wanted to hurt him so badly. I know, but you didn't. That's what matters. Olivier Deveraux died 6 weeks later in a Paris hospice. Simone didn't attend the funeral, but she heard it was well attended despite everything. The industry had a short memory for sins when genius was involved. A week after his death, Simone received a package. Inside was a leather notebook, the one Olivier had used during their sessions together. Tucked into the front was a letter in his handwriting, shaky and barely legible. Simone, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to have this. Every session we did together, I documented. Not just the technical details, but my observations, my thoughts, my growing realization that what I'd done to you was unforgivable. I also included everything about your mother, about what I did to her. Consider it evidence, or a confession, or whatever you need it to be. I've also amended my will. All the rights to the synesthetic methodology, all the patents, all the licensing fees, they revert to you. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's all I have left to give. I destroyed you to prove I was right. The irony is that you didn't need me to be extraordinary. You always were. I just convinced you otherwise. My greatest achievement and my greatest crime was making you doubt yourself. I hope you've remembered how brilliant you are without me. Olivier. Simone read the letter 3 times, then burned it. But she kept the notebook. She kept the documentation of what he'd done. Not for revenge, but for evidence, for protection, for the next woman who might need proof that their instincts about a charismatic mentor were correct. The rights to the methodology legally transferred to her name. Simone immediately made them public domain, free for anyone to use. She didn't want ownership of what Olivier had created, even if she'd helped perfect it. She just wanted to make sure no one else could weaponize it the way he had. 10 years after the accident, Simone Blanc was widely recognized as one of the most innovative perfumers of her generation. Maison Blanc had tripled its revenue under her leadership, and she'd trained dozens of students in ethical, supportive environments. She visited her mother every week, and Marguerite had more good days than bad now, moments of clarity where she could appreciate what her daughter had become. But late at night, alone in her cottage, Simone would sometimes think about the fragrance she'd created, the one she'd destroyed instead of sending to Olivier. She wondered if she'd made the right choice, wondered if mercy had been wisdom or cowardice. She wondered too about the students she trained, how to be supportive without being controlling, how to teach without manipulating, how to inspire without creating dependence. She was hyper-aware of power dynamics now, careful to maintain boundaries, always making sure her students knew they were free to leave, free to disagree, free to be brilliant without her. Sometimes she caught herself using Olivier's phrases, his techniques, his ways of explaining concepts. Those moments terrified her, because she understood now how easy it would be to become him, how simple it would be to mistake obsession for love, control for teaching, exploitation for collaboration. The worst part, the thing she could barely admit even to herself, was that she'd loved him. Genuinely, desperately loved him. And even knowing everything he'd done, even understanding that he'd orchestrated her accident and manipulated her recovery, some small part of her still remembered the way he'd made her feel. Seen, special, capable of greatness. That was his real genius. Not his theories about perfume or perception, but his ability to make broken people believe he was the only one who could fix them, then ensuring they stayed broken enough to need him. Simone had escaped. Her mother had not. And somewhere, probably, there were other women still trapped in the belief that they needed Olivier Deveraux's validation to matter. On the anniversary of her accident, Simone always did the same thing. She went to the laboratory at Maison Blanc, to the exact spot where the explosion had happened. She stood there and remembered the person she'd been before, naive and arrogant and whole. Then she remembered the person she'd become after, desperate and vulnerable and so easily manipulated. And finally, she acknowledged the person she was now, scarred and wary and still, somehow, able to create beauty despite everything. She couldn't smell her creations. She never would. That part of her was gone forever, stolen by a man who thought human beings were just test subjects for his theories. But she could feel them, could sense the way they changed the air, the way they affected the people who wore them, could create experiences that moved others even if she couldn't fully experience them herself. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But standing in the laboratory where she'd lost everything and somehow found a way to continue anyway, Simone thought maybe that was the point. Perfume was about transformation, taking raw materials and creating something new, something that changed how people experienced the world. Olivier had transformed her, yes, had taken her raw and vulnerable self and reshaped her according to his vision. But she'd transformed herself too, had taken the wreckage he'd left and rebuilt it into something he'd never imagined. Something stronger, more resilient, more ethical than he could ever be. She was Simone Blanc, fifth-generation perfumer, survivor, artist, and she smelled like roses, whether she could perceive it or not. Grandmère found her there an hour later, standing in the empty laboratory, tears streaming down her face. "Another anniversary," Grandmère said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Another year survived. More than survived, chérie. You've thrived. You've built something beautiful from tragedy. That's not nothing. It's not enough either." "Perhaps not." Grandmère took her hand, squeezed gently. "But it's honest. And after everything Olivier put you through, everything he took from you, your honesty, your integrity, those are yours. He never touched those, never could. That's what makes you different from him. That's what makes you better." They stood together in the fading light, two women bound by blood and loss and the complicated legacy of a man who'd destroyed them both in different ways. Outside, the lavender fields were in bloom, purple rose stretching toward the horizon. Simone couldn't smell them, but she could see them, could feel the warm breeze carrying their scent to others, could imagine the way they perfumed the air for everyone but her. And that, she thought, might be the truest metaphor for her life, creating beauty she could never fully experience, sharing gifts she could no longer receive, making the world more fragrant, knowing she'd never breathe it in herself. It was a kind of hell, but it was hers, and she'd learned to live in it with a grace that would have surprised the desperate woman who'd knocked on Olivier Deveraux' green door 10 years ago, looking for salvation. She hadn't found salvation, but she'd found survival, and some days that was more than enough.